What's up, my beautiful people? Welcome back to the War Room. I am your co-host and fight goddess, Chris Baldwin, and I'm here with my co-host, Malissa Smith. She is a women's boxing historian, and my boy, Eddie Goldman. We call him the Conscious of Combat Sports. What's up, fam? It's a cold day in Los Angeles, and we got a lot of news to talk about today, starting with the one and only asshole of the world. That's Putin and his little boys at the IBA who have just totally, completely destroyed Olympic boxing. I think they have single-handedly damn near destroyed Olympic boxing, and it's a shame. So, Eddie, why don't you give us an update on what's going on with Kremlin and Putin and the IOC and the Paris Games and boxing?
Yeah, and this is a pretty unprecedented situation because the IOC over the years has dropped sports before, but they usually plan their games many years ahead. For example, for 2024, they already have to plan all the qualifying events for 2023 for the athletes to qualify for Paris in 24. And we're, of course, at the end of December in 22. So for them to change the program for 2024 would be pretty unprecedented. But this is a pretty unprecedented situation that we're in because basically the IOC and the IBA are at war if you really look at what's going on. We've been talking about this for several months already, how prior to this announcement that was just made by the IOC, boxing was dropped from the program for 2028, the LA Olympics, but was still on the program for 24 in Paris, but the IBA would not be allowed to run it, but the IOC would be directly running it as they did in the Tokyo Olympics. Well, that apparently has changed because after those announcements at the recent IOC executive board meeting, which we discussed, the IBA had one of its congresses again, and they had their global boxing forum, and they were completely defiant. Kremlin, who has been linked to the Russian dictator Putin, said they have no right to dictate to us how to live and all this stuff. Well, if you're a member of the IOC, if your federation is a member of the IOC, you have to abide by the rules. I'm not defending by any means all the IOC's rules, but there are some basic things that have to go on. And they are basically flouting them in all ways, really. For example, they moved their headquarters, the main headquarters activities out of Lausanne, which is where most of the Olympic federations and the IOC headquartered, to Moscow so they could control it. They're planning their own world boxing tour. They've also announced that, again, in 2023, their almost exclusive source of funding, at least that's put out, will be Gazprom, the Russian-run state energy monopoly. So they're basically more dependent on the Russian government and Russian money. And so, in addition, after the IOC executive board meeting, Kremlin, according to the IOC, threatened to pull the IBA boxers from Paris, not allow them to compete in 2024 in Paris. So the IOC basically holds all the cards because the IOC does not need the IBA or boxing. The IBA needs the IOC. So they said, all right, you want to play this game? They issued a statement saying that basically the IBA wants to distract from its own grave governance issues by pointing to the past, which has been addressed by the IOC already in 2019, blaming everything on Dr. Wu, the former head of IBA, of AIBA, then known. Of course, the IBA didn't mention anything about Rakimov, and that was the the guy that's on the U.S. list of major criminals, major international drug dealers, and that's what's basically directly led to the suspension of IBA, now known as IBA, by the IOC. And the IOC will have to take all this into consideration when it takes further decisions, which may, after these latest developments, have to include the cancellation of boxing from the Olympic Games Paris 2024. This is a statement that was issued, first reported by the Washington Post, and has been reported in other places. Now, the IBA's plans to exist are to try and create a parallel boxing, amateur and even professional boxing circuit with money from Russia. And a lot of it will be based in Abu Dhabi, where they had their global boxing forum. And so it looks like instead of getting money from the IOC, which all the Olympic federations do, they split the money that coming from the Olympic Games and the broadcasting, which is the bulk of it from NBC in the US. They want to set up these other events, and apparently they will be getting money not only from Russia, but dirhams from Abu Dhabi and probably rials from Saudi Arabia too, which has been quieter on this. And this is also in line with a more general looming split in the Olympic movement, because in terms of Russia, Bach has said, well, we do want to have Russians back in 2024 in Paris in the Olympics, but they don't want to have them under their own flag and name. They want to bring them in as neutrals in some way. Well, I think they should be completely banned. I agree with Vladimir Klitschko, many others, but this is what Bach and also the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee apparently supports that position as well. But that Russia is not happy with that. They want to be completely exonerated. They are still suspended, by the way. RUSADA, the Russian anti-doping agency, is still suspended by WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, from all the suspensions from 2014 from the state-sponsored doping program and the cover-up and the manipulation of the lab results from the Moscow lab. And WADA said, well, the suspension was supposed to end about a week or so ago. But WADA said, well, we're going to, okay, before you're reinstated, we're going to have to really look at you and really investigate you to see whether you're compliant now. And the most famous case, of course, happened at the Winter Olympics, where the 15-year-old Russian figure skater, Valyeva, tested positive for a PED and was still allowed to compete, and took many months for RUSADA to make a decision on it, and then they didn't announce it publicly. And WADA and the IOC said, you got to announce it publicly, even though she was a minor at the time. You got to announce it because her name is out there. Everybody knows this. And and the event that she was in, they haven't even had the medal ceremony for almost a year later, because pending whether she was going to be disqualified because of the PED. So they're still up to the same nonsense, the still type of shenanigans. So what are they trying to do? So the president of the Russian Olympic Committee, Poznyatnikov, recently said, and he was quoted in TASS, Putin's mouthpiece, the Russian state news agency, that they want to create a, quote, alternative scenario if their athletes can't qualify for Paris 2024. They say, oh, yeah, we want to get back in the Olympics. But they're talking with other countries about creating alternative events, alternative Olympic type events. And they're working with a number of different federations. They want to do this through, as I talked about before, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which of course is based in China, and work with the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And also, a number of other countries are in the SCO and are joining the SCO at the same time. Um, so at this point, the SCO members are China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, India, and Pakistan, and Iran and Belarus are going to join.
Hmm.
And they also have observer states in Afghanistan and Mongolia. Now, in terms of boxing, if you look at these countries, other than perhaps Russia and a couple of boxers here and there from Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, these are not major boxing countries. The US, the UK, a number of other countries, Latin American countries, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Argentina, and other countries, they're not part of this and they won't not be part of this as countries. So they might set this up with other sports. In other sports, this might actually uh, be bigger. I mean, particularly wrestling, where Russia is such a great power in wrestling, and the head of the Russian Wrestling Federation, Mamashvili, is another one of these guys who's been banned for a couple of decades from entering the United States because of reputed mob links. But in terms of boxing, this will be kind of a bust. They could put on these boxing events, but they won't have the top boxers in the world. They'll try to throw money at them to get them to come. But if they set up these events, you can be sure the IOC is going to say you either with us or them. You either compete with the Olympics or you compete in their event. That's the
Right.
way the IOC works. So this is like a game of chicken that nobody's going to win. And what's going to suffer, of course, is the whole sport of boxing. The way boxing at this point that I see can be reinstated into the Olympics, even if they allow it to continue for 2024, is if there's a new international federation set up separate and apart from IBA. But that takes time to do that. The core of that's going to have to be the Common Cause Alliance, the USA Boxing, and the federations in Western Europe and the UK and most of Latin America to get something going. But that will take a while to set up and to become big enough for the IOC to accept it as an international federation. If you have 20 or 30 countries in it, even though they're large countries, you're not going to be accepted into IOC. You need the majority, at least over 80 or 90 or 100 countries to get into the IOC. So it's going to set back Olympic boxing in one way or another. And we know the effect that's going to have on professional boxing, that we know how many boxers, both men and particularly women, have come out of the Olympic movement. So if these events are no longer part of the Olympic program, in many countries, they're going to lose their major source of funding and also broadcast rights. Who's going to broadcast these things? Certainly, NBC isn't going to show some Russian alternative sporting event that takes place in Abu Dhabi or Uzbekistan or something like that. So they're going to lose that broadcasting money. And that's going to have a ripple effect rather quickly on professional boxing. So it's a real crisis situation, but it's typical of boxing. It's a thoroughly corrupt sport from top to bottom. And this is where we're at. We'll see whether the IOC actually dumps boxing from the 2024 program. Again, as I said, this would be unprecedented to do this at this late date. I don't know if they already have contracts in place for the venues and the sports that can't be broken for 2024. But in any case, it looks, even if they allow it, which is doubtful at this point, it seems almost impossible that it's going to be on the program for 2028, even if a new federation is formed. It would just take too long to get that up and running. And in boxing, it's not that popular in Paris, but in LA for 28, we know boxing is a pretty popular sport. There are many major professional events that take place at whatever they call the Staples Center now, and at events around the LA area and all over California, and of course all over the United States. So we're going to see what happens, but it's a dire situation for a corrupt sport, which bit by bit is hammering one nail after another into its coffin. That's where
Right.
we're at.
Wow. That is, I'm wondering, since the governance issues had to do a lot with, referees being suspended. I think all the AIBA referees were suspended. So
Yeah.
maybe they don't have the referees to ref these matches in 2024. I mean, where are they going to get these folks from?
Well, I do know that, one of the things that IOC has raised is precisely the referee and judging situation. That they have not been satisfied that there is a clean program in place.
Right.
So that is one of their concerns, and it is why they took over the 2024 boxing program directly and took it out of the hands of IBA.
Right.
The other thing, just to add on to what Eddie was saying is, in fact, IOC just put out a preliminary schedule for the trials and for all the preliminary stuff that was supposed to occur in 2023, getting ahead of the 2024 Olympics. So, because there's a lot of things that go on in the 2 years ramping up to the Olympics. So this is really catastrophic. As Eddie said, it's catastrophic to boxing, period, but in particular, as we've discussed before, it is catastrophic to women's boxing, which has really been able to leverage the attention and time to opportunity offered by the elite amateur programs through IBA with all of their issues and IBA, that it has offered to women to allow them to then propel from a very strong amateur platform into the professional side of the sport, particularly since 2017, when both Katie Taylor and Clarissa Shields turned professional after having competed in the first two in 2012 and 2016. We're also seeing fighters that competed in 2020 crossing over into the professional ranks and doing extremely well. So this will, as I said, be catastrophic. It will not only be catastrophic in places like the United States and Mexico, Argentina, the United Kingdom and Europe, where boxing has already really shown some opportunities for women, but in places like India, where their amateur program in particular has had a significant impact on the place of women in sports and athletics. And I'll add that there is going to be the women's world amateur competition is going to be, that those championships will be in India this spring. But what that impact is, even for those games, is unknown. The other minor thing is just part of why the IOC is so upset is that, as we've reported earlier, IBA just unilaterally said, hey, no, Russian and Belarusian fighters can fight. Which is contrary to IOC's decisions. They have not lifted the ban. And competing under their flags is in complete contradiction to IOC policy. So these kinds of issues are really developing into a wider and wider schism. And as we've also said previously, it's really the fighters who will lose. Absolutely. All of this other stuff is just politics and money, but it's the young fighters who lose terribly.
Well, speaking of women's boxing, what's up, Eddie?
I just want to add one thing, that these statements just came out. If you're still on Twitter, which by the time you hear this isn't
I'm in Twitter jail.
All right, if it isn't completely destroyed by Musk, and another pal of Putin, Boris van der Vost, who's the head of the Dutch Boxing Federation and the leader of the Common Cause Alliance, who wanted to run against Kremlin and they prevented him from running, issued a couple of statements on Twitter, and I would suggest people follow him. And he just wrote, this is about the statement that I read parts of. The recent statements from the IOC highlight that their patience is being tested and is close to running out with regards to IBA leadership and its incapacity, unwillingness to address the long-standing concerns. IBA continues to fight directly with the IOC and clearly doesn't understand that boxers, coaches, competition officials, and national federations, and then he put this in caps, do not belong to IBA.
Right.
Governing the sport of boxing is a privilege that IBA takes for granted, and this is a terrible approach. We cannot afford for boxing to be eliminated from the Olympic program in Paris 2024. We have to keep fighting for its re-inclusion in LA 2028. And this is the real key part. We have to do it with or without the IBA.
Damn right.
Well, that's something that's really key. So I would assume that once you post something like this on Twitter publicly, that there are already discussions behind the scenes for creating a new international federation. And I'm assuming also the IOC is very well aware of this possibility. We don't know what stage any of this stuff is. So things are happening very, very rapidly. It's supposed to be the end of the year, the best time of the year, the holiday season, and all this stuff, and people taking some time off and all that. Well, for boxing is in such a crisis, it's not happening at all. So we'll see where this goes, but we see what direction it's going in.
Right. All right. Well, look, it is the end of the year, and we are going to talk about women's boxing and who our fighter of the year is. And I think we're all in agreement that definitely, for me, Clarissa Shields came through, and the Taylor Serrano fight was the fight of the year for sure. But what do you think about that, Melissa?
Absolutely. Clarissa Shields, hands down, has fighter of the year accolade. She's ranked across the boards in many, many different rankings as the #1 fighter pound for pound, and very deservedly so. She has really done extraordinary work in the field of boxing, just as an athlete herself, as an elite athlete, but also for women in the sport, and as a remarkable spokesperson for where the future of the sport can go. As for Taylor Serrano, they put it on the map.
Right.
Absolutely put it on the map.
They sure did. I think, didn't they wind up with the most pay-per-view buys? Was their fight, or was that the Savannah Marshall Shields fight?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, the Taylor Serrano fight was the first time that women were the main event at Madison Square Garden, never mind in the main arena.
Right.
So, they were fighting in the house that, was built by many, many, many brilliant fighters, and when I was preparing to go, and I had some interviews with some folks at MSG, one of the places they took me to was their display for the Frazier Ali fight.
Wow.
Ali Frazier.
Right. I remember that fight.
So they got that this fight was on that caliber, that 40 years from now there will be a display that says Taylor Serrano. So it was really a momentous occasion. It sold out the Garden, and beyond that, it had over a million, approximately 1 million buys.
Yeah, that is fantastic.
Which was at that point a record.
That's a record, right?
So then
it was on DAZN, right?
On DAZN, right?
DAZN.
Yeah. So then you fast forward, 6 months, 7 months to the October all-female card in London at the O2 Arena, which had an undisputed fight, and then it had, the unification fight between Michaela Mayer and Alicia Baumgartner. You had Clarissa Shields and Savannah Marshall. Long term, a lot of bad blood since 2012, right?
Right.
Claressa Shields only lost to Savannah Marshall coming into that fight. A lot of hype, a lot of stuff. But more importantly, it was an all-female card at London's O2 Arena. Sort of the equivalent of Madison Square Garden. They sold that motherfucker out.
Yep, great year for boxing.
And they upped the number of buys, the number of viewers on Sky, which is where it was shown, by 500,000 people. So what you're talking about is that in that Taylor Serrano fight, in my estimation, piqued the interest in women's boxing and put it back where it belongs as a sport that is just a sport. It's not a little asterisk on the side. It's just a sport of brilliant athletes. And that's what came through in that fight. Of course, Claressa Shields just destroyed Savannah Marshall. I don't care what anybody says.
It was beautiful boxing.
It was beautiful boxing. And she showed and demonstrated why she is pound for pound the best this year, why she is fighter of the year across the boards, and really deserves those accolades and those opportunities. And you look at her, she's 27 years old, you know?
Wow.
When she fought, she was just 17.
Right.
17 when she won her first gold. And here she is, a mature woman, you know,
right. I love
really coming into her
prime. Love to see that growth. You know?
Yeah, truly remarkable growth. And as for Katie Taylor, you know, there's she is remarkable. She elevated the sport. Every time she walks in the ring, she elevates the sport in unique ways. She is she is sports person of the year in Ireland for the third time. That men or women. She's just the best sports person in Ireland. She's it. So, you know, she has all of those accolades. And, you know, Claressa and Katie will laugh at each other and chuckle, and they go, yeah, you're number one. No, you're number one. So they get that they're right there. And then they always appreciate each other when each other is at the number one spot. You know, they've both been at that number one spot and received those accolades over the years, and deservedly so, because they are in a class above everybody else, in my estimation, and remain there. As for 2023, there's a lot of momentum and a lot of opportunity. And aside from the machinations of the amateur world, there are big fights on the offing on the professional side. And more to the point, there's really going to be some honest discussion of the 2-minute versus 3-minute issues. There's going to be discussion of whether there's an increase in the number of rounds, let's say for things like undisputed and unification fights. So you'd have championships at 2x12, 2x10.
Mute your microphone.
And the potential for unification and undisputed bouts being at 2x12. This is going to be incremental. You know, WBC remains a strong advocate for remaining at 2-minute rounds because of what they perceive are increased risks to women of head injuries. And, you know, some of that has to do with remaining at 10 rounds too. So it's 20 minutes. And let's also talk about the economics. Number one, women aren't being paid. They're still, I mean, great. We have some stars that make 7 figures, but let's face it, an undisputed fighter who won her third undisputed should be at 8 figures, not 7.
Right.
And as for the women on the undercard, they remain underpaid pretty radically. You also have the issue of real estate. You know, when you have a 2x10, that's 20 minutes. And for promoters who really don't want women on their cards, all right, they'll give them 20 minutes. You go to 312, you're at 36 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big investment, right? Even if you have 2 women's bouts on your card, you're talking 40 minutes versus, you know, an hour and 12. It's a big difference. So, you know, there's some of that seriously going on in terms of real estate and timing on a card. If they put it, they can say, hey, we have a women's fight on the card. It's on the undercard. It's 20 minutes. If it doesn't go the full 20 minutes, then they even save some more time. So there are those issues, not only in terms of paying fighters, but in what real estate on airtime and broadcast time promoters are willing to put on. So those are issues that I think will really be more deeply investigated and looked at next year as women's boxing continues with their success because there are some fantastic fights and fighters coming along at the elite ranks in the championship rounds. I mean, I'll just mention one, Natasha Jonas, who won three belts at 154 in 1 year.
Good
She's
Lordy.
awesome. She is awesome. And whether or not she ends up fighting undisputed against Terry Harper, who also came up in weight, 154 and won a belt, or there is talk of a super fight with her and Clarissa Shields at 154.
Right.
I mean, there's some really good stuff going on. So at that rank, but also young upcoming fighters from the United States, from UK, from Europe, from Asia.
They're coming up. I'm watching them on
coming up.
Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, watch a fighter named Caroline Dubois. Oh my God, she's awesome. She, for me, she's prospect of the year. But there's also fighters like Nina Hughes, who at 40 came in and won a belt, looking fantastic. So women have a real range of opportunity, skills, and stories to tell that are really worth telling.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to see what 2023 brings. That's for sure.
I would still add, as I've been saying, and as we all know, the American TV networks are still, for the most part, not showing women's boxing because of all the greed and stupidity of professional boxing in the United States. Are only down to a couple of networks that show any boxing. One is ESPN. When they put on the Shields Marshall fight and other women's fights, they put it on their app, ESPN Plus, which, while that's been growing, still has a much smaller reach than ESPN. And they have not put women's boxing on ESPN. And even though when Clarissa Shields fought in the PFL, the MMA show, that was on, I believe, ESPN too, but they didn't even put her boxing fights on ESPN2. They just shuffled it off to the app. And the other one is Showtime, which here they've had a couple of women's fights, but their main bread and butter for boxing is PBC, which basically bans women. And, they're basically back in the medieval days or something like that because of Al Heyman and his company's misogyny. So there's still a ways to go. But again, boxing, even though women's boxing is becoming more and more popular, the way boxing is doing things is just shooting itself in the foot once more for the, whatever the adjective is for infinity, the infinitesimal time.
That's what happens when you have men in charge of women's boxing. That's fantastic. What else we want to talk about, folks? It is the end of the year, and we didn't do our You Don't Know Shit About Boxing Award. We're going to have to do that before the year is out.
I just think, I just want to wish everyone, thank all of our listeners and viewers for just giving us a banner year and giving us this platform and opportunity to give the real deal on combat sports, on really looking deeper at what's happening in the world and how it's affecting sports and those brilliant athletes who try to apply their trade. At the end, most fighters are just working class folks who are trying to earn a living, and they
feed their families. That's right.
Feed their families, and they deserve support, and they deserve respect, and they deserve a voice. And I'm just thankful that we're able to give voice to the voiceless and to raise issues that are important in terms of corruption in sports, sports justice, and sports opportunity. And I again, from the bottom of my heart, I thank everyone who listens and views and interacts with us, and wish you all a wonderful holiday season and a fabulous 2024.
Right on. All right, Eddie, do you have any last words you want to say?
I concur with those thoughts. I would just add on a note discussing social media, since we use that a lot, particularly to get the word out about the show. Despite all the madness that's going on Twitter, as of this date, it's still, I think, premature for people to leave completely Twitter. There's just too much traffic. There's too many people still on it, communicating. Just the tweets that I read from Boris van der Vost, for example, that's the way he's communicating to the world. There's just an awful lot that's going on in all types of realms. But there are other Twitter alternatives that are out there. I've signed up for a bunch of them, and I think the one that I'm using the most of all of them is a site called Post, which is still in beta, still has a waiting list to get on, still lacks a lot of features, and still has some glitches and questions to answer, and particularly about how they want to make how that can stay afloat financially. Questions about their financial model since they don't want to take advertising. But that's where we're on. And I think I encourage people, if you're on Twitter, stick on it for a little while, see what happens till you get kicked off or it closes down and becomes completely intolerable, or Musk starts making everybody pay money to be on it or give up more personal information to them. But check out these other new sites, and particularly Post. And so my handle is at NHB News at both of those places. And of course, if all this stuff goes to hell and we're at the end of social media, I have my site and blog, eddiegoldman.com, where you can keep up with my media activities. And I just had another article about what's going on in social media on my Patreon page at patreon.com/Eddie Goldman. And interestingly enough, I can link to that on Twitter. I cannot link to that on Post. And I do not why. And I've asked them and haven't gotten any response, because Post is trying to get writers to put their articles directly up on Post and get micropayments from get it for people to read it. That would make them a competitor of Patreon. So I don't know if that's why the links to Patreon aren't displaying, or whether because it's in beta and it's a glitch. I mean, there are just some other obvious things here and there. It's a feature they haven't, so they're adding new features all the time. So we'll see where all this heads. So have your own independent sites and media, because there's always something with these social media sites, and that's kind of where we're at.
That's right. Well, look, folks, we want to thank you guys for tuning in and hanging with us all year. Please subscribe to our channel. Go to our website at WAAR Sports. That's WAAR sports.com. You can find me. I'm in Twitter jail right now, but I'm usually on Twitter at Angry Afro Radio, because I talk shit about Republicans. And they don't obviously like that. They are a big bunch of crybabies over there. But I love Post News. So you guys check out post.news and definitely sign up. The waiting list is getting shorter. I think there's maybe 600,000, but they're letting people on all the time. The site's getting way better every day. Like I opened it today, and they had they had segregated everything. So now it's not just one stream. You can go explore, you can follow your friends, feeds, and that kind of stuff. So it's
and topics too.
And their topics too. So I'm proud to be one of the first Black posters. I call you guys Postmates. Posters on there. So you guys check us out, support independent journalism. Support my two rock star independent journalists. They're the journalists. I'm just here. I don't know shit about boxing. I should get that award. But until next time, folks, peace, love, and push-ups.
Happy